Hi, welcome to another Centrify Chalk Talk. This is Frank Cabri, and I'm joined here by David McNeely, our Director of Product Management. And today we're going to delve into a little bit of new territory, something we haven't spent a lot of time in Chalk Talks talking about, and that is embracing cloud computing and what are some of the issues that come up in that realm. And David, interesting place to start. I mean, you and I were on a call with a well-known reporter on an online publication a couple days ago, and she was clearly asking for someone to kind of spell it out for her and demystify what all the different type of cloud applications or capabilities are. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, certainly SaaS. Maybe we can start there and just kind of demystify those a little bit, explain what each one of those are, and we'll start there.
Sure. So cloud computing is sort of a general term that is an umbrella. It embraces all of those three categories you talked about. At the lowest, I view it as like three different layers in a stack. At the bottom is the computing gear itself. That's infrastructure as a service, where I could go to something like Amazon EC2 and buy a server, and they turn it on and then give me the account so I can log on. I can load any software I want. I can do anything I want to with that machine. Typically, you're buying CPU, a certain amount of virtual CPU, a certain amount of memory, and then disk is just by the gigabyte, however much you want to spend money on.
Yeah, but I'm managing it all. I'm deciding what I want.
Right.
I'm tearing it up and down.
Right. If you want to load applications on it, that's up to you. But it's your job to do whatever you want with that operating system. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like that because it gives them flexibility. They can load whatever web apps or databases they want. Sort of the next layer up is that web apps database layer, where if it's an infrastructure type of a component, they view it, and that's called platform as a service. Mm-hmm. And at the platform as a service layer, I could purchase websites, I could purchase a database. Your interface is not at the operating system level anymore; it's now at the API level or administrative interface for that particular kind of application.
Right.
Whatever that may be, if it's a database or a web server, it's going to be those interfaces.
Okay. And then SaaS, I guess, would be the application layer.
This is what most people already understand is, like Salesforce.com or WebEx or any of those kind of things are all, it's the software application that I get to buy. I'm just going to use it as another person in the system. Sometimes they'll carve out and create your own virtual environment so that, you see your data like in Salesforce. I don't see anybody else's data.
Right.
But I don't get to see the operating system underneath it or the website or anything like that.
Okay, good. So obviously you're spending a lot of time with our customers, and we're helping them bring their cross-platform system environment into Active Directory. What are you hearing them say about, what's driving them maybe to either look at cloud, or what types of applications or use cases are they looking for the cloud to help them out with? Either probably more on the infrastructure as a service side.
Right, so usually the driver for cloud is, it could be one of many different things, but I think there's two that sort of come out on top, and that is either a project that's short-term that requires a fairly large amount of compute infrastructure, and the resources to deliver that in a short amount of time frame is just really hard to accomplish inside the company with traditional IT.
Yeah.
We actually delivered a product, Deployment Manager, and one of the things we wanted to do here was scalability testing. That tool's purpose is to go and discover, quite a few different systems, deploy software, and have all the machines join Active Directory. So how do you simulate having 100 servers that it can connect to without spinning up, physically 100 different servers? Right. So you could do it in virtualized infrastructure. But 100 servers, I need to have a big enough, ESX server that's got, enough memory, enough hard drive, that kind of thing to spin up 100. So it was actually easier for us to go to the cloud and spin up 100 because, you go to the Amazon interface or the Rackspace interface or whoever, and it says, I want to spin up a Red Hat server. And then it asks you quantity, and you just type in 100 and hit go. You got 100 servers, later, you right?
Got servers, yeah.
And so that's one of the bigger reasons that people do this for smaller projects. And that's usually project by project. The other is cost. It's so inexpensive to do this that the person that's running the project can just use a credit card and then expense it.
Yeah, right. They don't have to go through the approval process and do that.
Right.
All day.
In fact, you'll get my expense report later. Okay. And then there's another, I've run across a couple of other customers who've said, their data centers are at capacity. They've got more projects coming online. They've even been encouraging their customers within the organization to convert from physical servers to virtual servers with a buyback program. You give us one physical server, I'll give you 5 VMs. It's a whole lot easier to manage the VMs inside the environment. But take that same issue of maxed out data center and it costs money to buy servers and put them into the data center, and If I can't expand the size of my data center and I need more compute, you start looking at the cloud infrastructures. They're pretty inexpensive compared to what it would cost to expand my data center, buy machines, pay the perpetual licenses for all this stuff.
Sure. Okay, good. And so we know customers are starting to do that. We've seen some of our own customers having discussions with us about that. What are the typical challenges they're running into? So, I want to embrace some of the and get some of the benefits you talked about. I'm sure there's security or compliance challenges, maybe even logistical or operational challenges that they're up against.
Yeah, there's quite a few different challenges. And the way I look at it, you have to start looking at the server from when it's very first turned on. If I go out to Amazon or any of the other cloud providers and turn on a server, I'm taking somebody else's image, somebody else's template, and using it. And so when they installed the operating system, they had to answer a few OS level questions. And it's because they wanted to give me a server up and running very, very fast, right? Otherwise, I could have just gone out and create my own templates. And a lot of people do create their own templates. But these templates that are pre-created have the privileged account has already been created, and it already has a password, or there's a mechanism required to gain access to that particular server. And if I'm an enterprise organization, I'm going to spin up 100 of these servers, I need to be able to control those privileged accounts. So from the very moment that it turns on, that's one of the issues is how do I take over the privileged accounts, and how do I enable my staff to be able to log onto that system and get the privileges that they need?
Yeah.
That's very traditional identity management, access management to the system. You also have several other security policies that go right along with that. What is the base image template? How's it configured? Does it have a firewall that's on the host?
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about the issues of just, it's not in your data center or your closet down the hallway. It's now sitting at a third party, and you can't necessarily control operational folks at that third-party site. So how do you kind of ensure both that, I guess that's partly through the privilege access, but also that only you have access to the systems, and you've got that trust between systems on your premise and the ones in the cloud?
Right. So I first start out by saying there's quite a few different cloud models where I can go purchase infrastructure as a service. And there are several vendors that will outsource and manage it for you. In those cases, you're setting up a trust relationship with a business agreement that says, I'll trust you, hosting provider to provide me servers, and you're going to manage the security on those systems. In that case, the business level agreement did that work of ensuring that they're secured and that there's monitoring taking place on the systems. People like SAAS are in the business of doing that kind of work. And then there's, if I'm buying a server from Amazon, they're basically spinning up a server and handing it over to you and saying, it's all yours, not my responsibility anymore. I'll run the infrastructure underneath it, and I'll protect, the in-memory and the on-disk between that system and others that are hosted in the environment, but you're responsible for all the security of that system.
Right.
So you have to look at both the network access of the system, who's allowed to gain access to it from a firewall point of view. You also have to look at the users that are authorized to gain access. And usually you need to set up your own infrastructure and tie it back to your infrastructure so that there's a way for you to grant your own staff the ability to log into those systems that are hosted.
Okay, that sounds like it begs for maybe a quick drawing on how that works and some of the new stuff that you're working on from Centrify.
Okay. The first thing is that most enterprises already have Active Directory set up. This is where the user accounts exist. And what we're talking about doing is enabling these people to be able to gain access to new compute resources that live outside the organization. One of the features that we're going to leverage is Microsoft Server and Domain Isolation. But the way this works is let's assume that I get a couple of servers set up in a cloud environment here. And these are, it doesn't matter what cloud provider they are, and we're just going to assume that internet connectivity exists. Most cloud providers, by the way, will give me public IPs for these machines, which means from the inside I can get to them going out, and the machines on the outside obviously can't come through the firewall to get to my systems, but usually it's people on the inside that need to get to those servers, and so that use case typically works. If in fact these machines really needed to get on the inside, we need to look at a different networking technology. So public IP addresses, they're obviously connected to the internet. Most people already have a DMZ set up. And we're going to use the DMZ as a place to allow those machines to join into a new Active Directory infrastructure.
I see. Okay.
And the reason we're using a new one is because we don't want to expose the one that we have on the inside to the outside world. So there's a nice line here that consists of the firewall. Mm-hmm. But I need those machines to be able to join into Active Directory so that they can support Active Directory user-based authentication. We're going to leverage a one-way trust in order to let these users access resources that are tied into the other Active Directory infrastructure. So as long as I've got connectivity and they can see this machine, and he's on the public internet, they'll be able to do a join operation into that Active Directory infrastructure. Now this user can log into that machine.
And so you've created almost your own, you've just extended your data center
right.
virtually to these cloud-hosted systems.
Although in order to make sure that this is secured, we're going to have to use IPSec in transport mode. There's IPSec, most people know of IPSec in VPN usage, which means setting up a client here that logs on to a gateway over here on this
client
side.
To host kind of VPN, yeah.
And we talked about in our Direct Secure product, how to use IPSec as a way to logically isolate machines regardless of what network they're on. All we're doing here is to say, well, there's a network that's in the cloud. It's got public IP addresses. This machine has got public IP addresses. And since they're all in the public open, we want to protect them and make sure that they only allow communication from other trusted systems. So we've been working on methods to take this machine, fire it up, and have it join Active Directory in a secured fashion that enables us to establish that security. This machine in the DMZ is going to be set up so that he only allows communication from systems that are trusted. In other words, systems that can identify who they are.
So I configure that in advance to create this
right.
trusted environment.
Right.
Okay.
And so now that I have this kind of connectivity, then I can have the machines join into Active Directory. Now, one of the nice things about joining Active Directory is that we can leverage all of the users, the groups, the group policy infrastructures to enforce a lot of policies so that the idea being really if I were to spin up a brand new one of these and add it to the environment, he performs a join operation to AD, he picks up policies, and based on the users coming out of the Active Directory infrastructure, these users automatically get to log in.
Now how does that join happen? Is that an automated function as well?
Well, there's some technology that we've created in a deployment manager tool that enables that kind of join. What we've done is the easiest way to look at it is it would be something I run here on my workstation as deployment manager, and it will go create the computer account here, upload the software, and then tell this machine to join to the pre-created computer account. And so since I have rights to this directory from this workstation point of view, I can go write the computer account. And then as I connect to this machine up in the cloud, I can tell it to go join into the Active Directory.
Got it. Okay.
This tool was designed to basically have you add a computer to the system and then have you go out and analyze the system's readiness to join Active Directory, fixing problems like, what if this machine was looking at a different DNS like inside the cloud and not one that knew about this domain controller? I could fix that and make it point to this DNS.
So it does that pre-flight check, if you will.
It does all of that work and fixes everything. And then it can push over the software and then tell it to join. So there are some other things that we've done to the deployment manager that makes it a little bit easier to use in cloud environments. Remember, this kept up with a little database of all the accounts that existed in the cloud, or all the, let's say, servers that you had in the cloud. But there may be some other methods of provisioning, and we've run across a lot of different scenarios. So this is one that I described where I'm doing it manually based on the deployment manager. There's another model where we basically preload a server template, put our software onto it. I've got a couple of customers doing that now where the server templates they use have Centrify on them. And basically the machine boots up and the first time boot script says, go join Active Directory. You can either have a computer account pre-created and I just grab the next available computer account, or you could say, put an account inside that first boot script that has very explicit permissions to do the one operation, creating computer accounts in the directory. Mm-hmm. Either way really works. It's up to you as far as the security model you want to adhere to. If that were the case, or I had another tool like RightScale that can basically monitor the load of a website and say, I've got 3 servers now, but if load gets to this peak threshold, then spin up 2 more systems. So now you got a little bit more dynamic, and that's sort of the beauty of the cloud, is being able to be dynamic. This tool then would need to be able to just simply somehow keep up to date with the number of servers I have in the cloud. So we've added some capabilities here for it to make calls to the vCloud API or to the Amazon's EC2 interface to basically ask, what are the set of servers that I have configured for my account? Because they're linked to my account, to the person that logged onto the interface.
Very cool.
That then gives you a much more dynamic environment. And at that point, you also have some other tools here in the deployment manager. I think we talked about before, the ability to launch PuTTY or WinSCP and that kind of thing to be able to get to my servers interactively.
So you've basically taken Deployment Manager and extended all the capabilities of that for your private data center environment, extended that to work with any kind of Amazon cloud or any vCloud instance that's in a public environment.
Right, and that's actually another thing that's happening is that as enterprises look to deploy cloud infrastructures, what they're seeing is that VMware is moving from using ESX to abstracting that into a logical vCloud, where I could spin up my own VMs and float them across multiple ESX servers, and making that easier to manage. Basically, that means that the vCloud API exists inside my company, and I can use the same tool to access an internal cloud, just like I would an external cloud. And there's quite a few other advantages that VMware will be talking about at the VMworld in using that tool set. Just because it's going to be the same kind of tool set that you'll find at some of the other vCloud Express providers on the internet today.
Okay, so great. So I'm able to easily spin these servers up, and now I can manage them through a single pane of glass with your deployment manager. Now, as far as monitoring and getting visibility into what's happening on those systems, who made what changes, that type of thing, what commands happened on those systems, what's the story for auditing in this environment?
Right, actually I think that's another one that's really important. A lot of people sort of depended upon when systems were inside my data center. I had the comfort around the fact that I had doors that I controlled access to, and we set up more stringent access policies to those doors. My badge didn't get me in, but the IT guy can get in, and that kind of thing. And obviously, the physical building security and the security officer could watch cameras to the doors, that kind of thing. And that's another huge change for IT because these servers are now virtual and they moved outside my company, so they're not, behind that same kind of protection, the same kind of physical protection. So, on the inside, we used to depend upon log analysis tools and rolling up logs, and of course, you also had, the door access logs and video camera footage if you really needed to determine, who was doing things to the servers. We're starting to find that monitoring is becoming a lot more important, especially for regulations. If you take the machines and move them out to the cloud, it's sort of a bigger question of like, who's accessing my servers? Obviously I've done a lot of work to put in place some network security functions here that protect access to those servers, but user activity is something that becomes much, much more important. And again, we can leverage our direct audit tool as a way to record the activity of users. It records the interactive login sessions into a database that's off the machine so that we can then go back and look at the sessions, play those back. And it doesn't matter how people get to the machine or who it is that's logging in, we'll be able to record the activity. So that just gives a lot better comfort feeling around who's accessing the machines, and it adds to the data set that log analysis log rollup does. And a lot of times we find customers merging those two together to get a better picture.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about moving the server instances out and how to audit that environment. What about applications, like any web app, if I want to host that or push that to the cloud? Can you help with that model as well?
Actually, the fact that we've joined these machines to Active Directory helps out quite a bit. Going inside this virtual machine, let's just draw a line and say that this is the OS layer and this is the app layer. If the application layer can make a call into the OS and the OS is tied to Active Directory, then we can enable the application to tie into Active Directory for user authentication functions. And we have specific plugins for Apache and the J2EE-based applications and DB2 and the like, so that the databases and apps all work together, tie into the operating system. That just simply means that we can very easily go back to your existing process around granting this user the right to log on to resources. They're no longer inside, so we're going to be managing the access control policies in this directory that's protected, but it's the one that governs those applications. And then based on the fact that these machines are tied into Active Directory, both Kerberos for single sign-on as well as SAML or ADFS work correctly to go control user login to those applications. In the case of Apache or the J2E-based applications, we can even go back and say, well, an Active Directory group based here that has members from these users, I can use to control who can gain access to that application.
So this is all great stuff. I think one of the questions that IT folks might have is, so I now have to move Active Directory into the DMZ, right, to be my centralized directory for not only my internal stuff, but for my cloud-based stuff. Is that a legitimate concern? How would you address that concern that customers might have?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question because it is something new for a lot of people. While there's a lot of organizations that do have machines in the DMZ, I think running Active Directory in the DMZ is kind of a new thing. But one of the things we are saying is that this Active Directory that you run on the inside is not copied and put into the DMZ. We're saying set up a new Active Directory forest in the DMZ. Here, what I've done is set up one and call it, cloud.centrify.com or something like that, right? It's a completely separate Active Directory forest, and it has this one-way trust relationship. So I've got a very nice security boundary between the two. The administrators that log onto this are completely different than the administrators that log onto this one. In fact, I'm the one that logs onto that one, and IT runs and manages the inside one, right? But we have a relationship, a trust relationship. I think there's another issue, which is you want me to put Active Directory outside the firewall. How secure is that? I think actually Direct Secure answers, or IPSec server and domain isolation answers that, because that allows us to control access much more granularly in the system. One of the other things that's about this kind of a solution is that we actually have a couple of other service providers that are doing exactly this type of thing in their hosting environment. Offering this kind of solution to their customers. So both Savvis and Via West are both doing this. The infrastructure itself that they expose to their customers has Active Directory behind the scenes in order to manage the user accounts. It really is a security infrastructure, right? It's more than just a directory repository, since I can tie all the systems to this security infrastructure.
Okay.
And the benefit to the customer is that he gets a single user account that he can use to log into various servers. So as I log into a virtual private data center, I get one account that I can use to log into that Windows server, and if I add a Linux system, I use the same account to log into a Linux system. I add 10 more Linux systems, it's the same account, right? I get to use that Active Directory for that purpose.
One last question, if customers that are watching this or folks that are familiar with Centrify, this involves a core set of capabilities that we've always offered. What's unique about what we're introducing with the new capabilities around pushing this stuff to the cloud?
Right. There's a lot of things that are very similar from what we've been doing before. One of the things that's different about this is that we are proposing a deployment model with respect to setting up a new AD forest on the outside with a trust relationship to the one on the inside. We're also leveraging Microsoft server and domain isolation, IPSec capability in a transport mode. Because when you start looking at the firewall rules and the kind of traffic required to let systems on the outside talk to domain controllers on the inside, it usually requires too many firewall ports to be opened. With IPSec in a transport mode, which is peer-to-peer, I only need to allow the IPSec ports to be opened. That's a very few number of them, and that narrows the security risk quite a bit.
Right, so you're moving the responsibility back to the host systems itself for blocking or allowing communications.
It allows you to describe an isolated environment so that only systems that belong to my company are allowed to communicate on those ports. So I don't usually have to worry too much about those just because it's treated identically to VPN traffic by firewalls. They typically will allow it. That technology is the same one that allows us to totally isolate these machines regardless of where they are. So I don't worry about them being on the public internet. Because of the fact that we're using IPSec policies on each and every host, we can basically describe an IPSec required for all of these machines that are outside the firewall, meaning if you don't have IPSec capabilities on your particular laptop or host, and you don't have credentials from my company, there's no way you're going to talk to me. I'm just going to deny traffic altogether.
Great. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
All right, that wraps up another Centrify Chalk Talk. And again, I'm Frank Cabri with David McNeely, and we encourage you to check out centrify.com. There's a lot of other Chalk Talks and product demos around Deployment Manager and Direct Secure that go into more detail than what we talked about today, so check those out as well. Thanks again.